Hold on. Do we have audio for this? We do not? Oh, I'll put it to my mic, yeah. Awesome. Crank it up.
My name is Carl Wolf, and I was a precision electronics photographic repairman with a top secret crypto clearance in the United States Air Force. I was stationed at Langley Air Force Base in Virginia. In 1965, in mid-1965, I was loaned to the Lunar Orbiter Project at NASA on Langley Field. Dr. Colley was in charge of that project. They had problems with a piece of electronic equipment that was bottlenecking their production of photographs. I went to the facility, and when I walked into the facility, there were scientists from all over the world. I was stunned, actually, to see people at a NASA project from all over the world. It didn't make any sense to me initially. I was taken into the laboratory where the equipment was malfunctioning. I couldn't repair it in the dark. I asked to have it removed. A airman second class was in the dark room at that time. I was also an airman second class. I was interested in how the whole process functioned, how the data got from the lunar orbiter to the laboratory. Asked the young man if he described the process to me. He did. About 30 minutes into the process, he said to me, in a very distressed way, by the way, we've discovered a base on the backside of the moon. And then he proceeded to put photographs down in front of me, and clearly in these photographs were structures, mushroom-shaped buildings, spherical buildings, and towers. And at that point, I was very concerned because I knew we were working on compartmentalized security. He had breached security, and I was actually frightened at that moment. And I did not question him any further. And a few moments later, someone did come into the room. I worked there for 3 more days, and I remember going home and naively thinking, I can't wait to hear about this on the evening news. And here it is, more than 30 years later, and I hope we hear about it tonight. And I will testify under oath before Congress.
Like the helpless damsel in distress. Thank you very much. Then we have some other statements. Can you hear me all right here? Is this good? All right, good. Clark McClelland. I've spoken with Clark a number of times also. He had many, many years working at Cape Canaveral and Kennedy Space Center. This is a statement he put on AboveTopSecret.com. If you go to ATS, I visit it pretty frequently. He just writes here, I worked at Cape Canaveral and the Kennedy Space Center from 1958 to 1992. There are many mysteries that have been discovered during the years that we have been exploring the moon, sun, and planets. The former CEO of Lockheed Skunk Works was visiting the Cape many years ago. I asked him a question. This is Ben Rich. Ben Rich said, Clark, black budget dollars have taken the USA military at least 50 plus years beyond the present understanding of the general public and how far we are technologically advanced. You have no idea where we have gone out there. I said, Mars, sir? He looked at me and his head movement said yes. Are there monuments on the moon, Mars, etc.? Bet on it. Again, that's a thread from Above Top Secret. You've got the link right there. You can find that, no problem. And then we have the story of Gary McKinnon. In a nutshell, his case is still, it drags on. This has been almost a full decade. And this man's life has been in limbo since he was arrested in November of 2002. And essentially, Gary McKinnon was looking for proof of UFOs and of the cover-up. To call him a hacker is really not accurate, but he was peeking to the extent that he could into various U.S. defense websites looking for evidence of a UFO cover-up, and what he found on the U.S. Space Command site around November of 2000, he found a list of what he said were officer names under the heading non-terrestrial officers. He also found a list of what were called fleet-to-fleet transfers, which had a list of ship names. None of those names were correspondent to any U.S. Navy ships. Couldn't remember the names, unfortunately. Then was arrested in 2 years after that, in 2002. And to this day, he's in danger of extradition. His fate is not resolved. What's interesting, by the way, as an aside about the McKinnon case, if you study the media coverage, the reportage of his saga, in the early years, the UFO angle was very, very prominently displayed. This guy looking for the UFO cover-up finds XYZ, is arrested, wow. Look up the McKinnon case and track the coverage in subsequent years. And the longer we go into this, the UFO thing, if it even appears anywhere, it's at the bottom, tucked away. And now he's simply called by the Pentagon the greatest Pentagon hacker in history, which is a load of rubbish. Absolute rubbish. But this is, so in other words, the whole UFO angle has been very, very subtly siphoned out of the story, and that's what it's all about. And the fact is, I think Gary McKinnon did find evidence of a secret space program. That's, I think, the single most logical conclusion. Then we have some photographic anomalies. Again, this is Richard Hoagland's territory, not truly mine, but hey, I'm allowed to look at these pictures too. And also, I mean, I would just say I try to, I don't want to just blah, blah you to death here. I try to read what people and analysts have to say about it. I'm not a physicist at all. I'm not a true photographic analyst. I know how to look at some pictures a little bit, but that doesn't make me an expert. But this is a very famous photograph. It's called the Shard, and in the background the tower. And in fact, Richard's talked about this on Coast, I think, a number of times. All he can say is that this object in the foreground, the Shard, is estimated to be about 1.5 miles high, about 2 kilometers. And the blur, or the tower behind it, about 7 miles, 10 kilometers or more high. I would say that this qualifies as pretty darn interesting indeed. I would like for there to be follow-up confirming evidence from other photographic sources, and maybe they exist. I'm not aware of them. Nonetheless, they're interesting. They're very interesting. And if I were running a clandestine program, I could bet you that I would be very interested in following up with covert missions to look into that. Absolutely I would. Absolutely I would. And there are these other things. Again, this is one that John Lear, again, chatted. I was talking with Richard, I think, about this the other day. I think I was talking with Richard about this. The evidence, what John Lear is convinced, looks like strip mining on the moon. I have to say the photograph does look something like strip mining. I wouldn't say it's going on today. I don't. If you compare it with photographs of actual strip mining operations, like, say, this one, this is a lot more involved. I think I'm not really convinced that that is a strip mining operation, but it does, have a kind of at least superficial similarity, and you could say this is worthy of a follow-up investigation. And once again, if I were gifted with such exotic technology that allowed me to go off-world, yes, I would absolutely be looking into that. I would find that to be of enough interest to justify it. And then we have the monolith on Phobos. There's a picture of Phobos, the irregular moon of Mars, one of them. Only recently discovered, as far as I know. It's fascinating to me. I mean, absolutely. I mean, look at that. That's a monolith to your top right. That thing is shaved off. It looks pretty darn squared off to me. That does not look like a natural object. Not at all. When Buzz Aldrin talked about it, you got to wonder what's inside the Buzz Aldrin's head. I'm sure all of us in this room would love to have an open, honest, quiet conversation with this man. Because he seems to be making these various statements that just are right out there. About being followed on the way to the moon. Well, that's pretty darn interesting. And then he makes a comment on this. But of course, every time he makes a statement, then he runs away from it. Edgar Mitchell, incidentally, I mentioned his statements previously about his high-level connections relating to ET bodies and technology. He also, I have to say, has really run away from those statements. And he made several of them very explicit. But now you get Edgar Mitchell to talk about this, and he's much more, he holds back. And he offers his opinion and much more nebulous statements about the reality of this all and how he's convinced that it's real. But he doesn't talk the way he used to. He doesn't make these statements. Same with Buzz Aldrin. So the Phobos monolith, good God, that's a fascinating thing. And I would say at this point, I don't know how else to characterize that except as an evidence of artificiality. That's my own non-scientific opinion. And then, of course, we have Mars. And I am in no way going to give you an extended discourse on this, except that I would say that I also feel that what we have is you've got formations that do not look natural. Not to Mr. Hoagland, not to a lot of other scientists, and certainly not to myself. And so whether they're ancient, which I would suspect they are, or whether they're more recent, whatever, that's a secondary issue in my opinion. The bottom line is that these look darn strange, and they don't look to me like they're supposed to be there. So again, you have evidence of at least a strong motivation for us to breakaway civilization to go off-world and investigate. Is it like in Kubrick's movie 2001: Space Odyssey, where you've got the monolith on the moon? Is it something that going there we would discover some great secret? Well, yeah, maybe. You wouldn't want the world to know about it, though, because, well, there goes your secrecy. The whole thing comes unglued, and again, I'll be coming back to that in a moment. Now I'd like to talk a little bit about a guy who I really think has not gotten enough attention that I feel he deserves. Jeff Challenger, he's no longer alive. He died in October 2007. I met Jeff one time. He lived in Sacramento, California. As you'll see in this news article story about him, he was paralyzed. He had a spinal injury, and so spent really his adult life lying prone, and he devoted himself to downloading NASA links of NASA missions, and also those of the European Space Agency and Russia toward the end there, and just looking at them and studying them and looking for strange things. And guess what? He found a lot of strange things. Other people have done this, but Jeff did a lot of work on it. As a personal note, I will just tell you this very odd story. It's totally true. Now, I'd been familiar with Jeff's work for some time. His website was called Project Prove. And I don't remember exactly when I became acquainted with him, around maybe 03, 04. And I was a fan right from the get-go. But in the fall of 07, I don't really know why, but I became absolutely obsessed by this man's website. I was telling everyone, you've got to look at Challenger's site. This is an amazing site. It's great. ProjectProve.com. Go there, go there, go there. I was talking about his work at various conferences. I was really talking Jeff up. And in early October 07, I was in France. I was talking to some people there about Jeff. I said, this guy has got some amazing stuff. And on a whim, I thought, I really want to do a download of his entire site. So I did a rip of his site on a super slow internet connection. It took hours. But I did it. I did the whole site. And the next day, I got an email that told me Jeff Challenger had died. And I thought, wow, what are the odds? I will go to my dying day convinced that there was something very, very unconventional happening in terms of our reality that had me focusing on that man at that time. I don't know what it was, but I was absolutely, utterly obsessed with his work. And then he died, and I had his website. And shortly after that, his website went offline, and it was gone forever. I happened to have, as far as I can tell, in the public domain, the only copy of his site, and I asked his widow permission a little while after that if I could put his site up attached to my own, and I now have it up there. So I have Jeff's website attached to keyholepublishing.com, and I would encourage you to go through it. You could spend a lot of time, months, going through it. You wouldn't be done. This is a 2-minute clip of a local news article from California about Jeff, and then I want to show you some of the anomalies that...
The Sacramento man tonight has his eyes on the skies, looking for objects that may be out of this world.
What he's found so far will get you thinking about life on other planets. Tony Lopez in the newsroom with incredible pictures.
Yeah, they really are. You know, when we see a big, bright object that lights up the night sky, chances are it's the big, bright moon, right? But what if that object is moving? And what if that object can't be explained?
Almost a blur. Went under the plane and pulled out in front.
Don't call the guy with a pack of cigs and a battery crazy or lazy. A spinal injury means Jeff Challenger spends most of his time in bed. What he sees from his perch is out of this world.
All right, well, that looks good.
Jeff records and studies images from the NASA television channel. Most of it's been uneventful. Most of it.
Ran across something that just, whoa, what was that?
That was this, the bright object ripping through space.
And I ran the tape back a little bit, watched it again, I watched it again, and I'm hollering on the hall, hey, honey, you gotta come see this.
The object caught on tape did not come from, say, the camcorder of a UFO enthusiast, but from NASA during the Shuttle Atlantis mission in September of 2000. Since 1999, Jeff figures he's seen at least 100 of what he calls anomalous events, a fancy way of saying UFOs. Here's another one, recorded during the recent Discovery mission, and yet another.
They're not an ice chip, they're not a piece of debris, it's not the moon, it's not a star, not another spacecraft, not a satellite.
This is what a real ice chip looks like, Jeff claims. Not nearly as bright as the unidentified object, and you can see the ice chip turn. Tonight you can hear the critics. He wants it clear, though. He just spots anomalies in space. It's not time, he says, to welcome the little green men, but he will keep looking out for anything that can't be explained.
From one mission to another, you never know what you're going to find.
So Jeff Challenger, who died October, highlighted a number of other oddities in Earth orbit, and these are all, of course, looking down at Earth from the space shuttle. The guy running the, determining who sees what on the NASA TV is called the IMCO, and that person can control, if they think it gets a little too crazy, often they'll black it out like this, but then they, you know, lighten it up. One thing Jeff pointed out is that on the NASA station, there's a tremendous amount of what seemed to be intentional interference to degrade the quality of the video. And I think he made some sense on that. There are these two objects and others. It's hard, some of them are hard to see, and the resolution here isn't quite the best. But you can see that there are things moving around that beg an explanation. This one's almost done. I'll probably let this one go on a little longer than necessary, but I think it's just about done. Let's move on. Now this is actually quite interesting. Same mission next day. Still STS-96, 1999. What you're going to see is a very fast streaking object. It's going to go diagonally from the top, your top left down to the bottom right. It's very quick. You'll see it more than once. And then what you'll see is another object going in the same direction, and it will slow down toward the end. You'll see it happen. So let's take a look here. Keep your eye. There it goes, the bright, fast, and that's the other one. You can see it slowing down. That's a city below. We're going to see it again. That object slowed down. Here it is again at reduced speed. Now, you know, I don't know of any dust particle that can slow down, or any craft in space that can change direction or slow down like that. Here's something, I don't know if it's the firing of a weapon, but you're going to see two objects moving at a perpendicular way. So one's going to come straight up from below, and the other one is going to miss it, but not by much, going in a horizontal manner. This is near the city of New Orleans. So here it is, going straight up, and then the other object going across, at right angles to each other. And we'll show this at slower speed. Here it is, slower. Can you see that? You can see that a little bit. It's not the clearest, but okay. So let's move ahead. Another one, this is from 2000, STS-106. Now this is a fascinating one because you will see a definite triangular formation in motion. The sun had not risen at this point, so there's, you know, you can't blame it on reflectivity. These objects, as you will see, are in formation, but they're not in a locked formation. They maneuver within small parameters. There is a U.S. Navy satellite called the NOS. This is a trio of satellites that orbit, but their orbit is higher, much higher than that of the space shuttle, so you wouldn't see them below. So let's take a look. You're going to see this in two different ways. So first, with the objects highlighted. And you can see also how they sort of maneuver slightly within their circle. So it's not an exact maneuvering, but they are in a formation. And now I'm going to show you, this is 50% speeded up without any highlighting, but now that you know what to look for, I bet you that you'll have an easy time seeing this, even though it's faster. Here it goes. There they are. I'll do it again for you so you can see. It's kind of in double time. So here it is again. The top one seems to be flashing a little bit more. But they're definitely in motion. There's 4 of them, but they're in a kind of a triangular pattern. What are these? Well, we'll talk about that in a minute. And here's another one. Same mission, STS-106, September 2000. This is over the city of Chicago. Now here, this is fascinating, because this is going to, you have an audio clip of the NASA commentator, and he is absolutely at a loss of how to describe that bright thing in the center. That's what you're going to be looking at, and it's actually pretty humorous. So here we go.
Atlantis is approaching sunrise as it approaches the Great Lakes area. This a view of Chicago, and also some ice crystals or other items being illuminated by the rising sun. Atlantis moving into sunrise in just about the next minute or so. As that occurs, ice crystals or water that's been dumped overboard from the shuttle is always illuminated in the close vicinity of the spacecraft. Again, that view of Chicago, though, and the shore of Lake Michigan.
Yeah, let's talk about Chicago. Isn't that awesome from this space? A couple of things. First of all, the sun had not yet risen, so they were not in sunlight. And he's trying to make it sound like, oh, yeah, well, the sun's almost about to rise. You know, he was obviously not saying what everyone in the world who would have looked at that would have been thinking, because obviously he couldn't. He couldn't. Now, this is actually the zoom of the same object, so you can just take another look at it. Pulsing with quite interesting regularity. And it also appears to me, anyway, that the lens is still, here we go, keeping on to it. It's moving, zooming in, and that's the end of it. I have 5 minutes. Really? Uh-oh. Really? All right. I'll do my best. This is an object doing a U-turn. This is my last of the space clips. I'll show it again. Just take a look. Kind of nifty. Now here's an enhanced version of the same clip, and you can see it actually maneuvering as it goes back and forth. What is that? That's from 2005, STS, I believe, 114.
It's not the first time someone has recorded something mysterious over Lake Erie, but it could be the first time it's this clear.
It was just probably one of the craziest nights of activity I've ever experienced.
Michael Lee Hill is the self-described UFO enthusiast who's releasing this never-before-seen video. According to Hill, the video was shot in November on the east side near his home in Eastlake. It obviously shows something, but what is what's up for debate.
I've been filming these for a long time, and it's just grown to the point where they've let me know. They know I'm sitting there filming them. You know, they'll come in, every year they've come in closer and closer.
I go outside and I look up in the sky and I see them up there. Every so often you see strange lights blinking on and off.
It's not hard to find people who believe the lakeshore is a hotbed for extraterrestrial activity. Last year, in fact, Fox 8 revealed these images of similar lights over the lake. And after our stories aired, a team from the Cleveland Ufology Project tracked the lights. The organization was founded back in 1952, and its members consider themselves experts who determined these were airplanes. But now, Michael says you can't debate it anymore.
The fact that this remains in the screen and is not moving, I believe, negates any notion that it's an aircraft.
Now, it goes without saying, but of course we'll say it anyway. NASA, the military, no one will comment on any of this. But we do know planes are always landing and taking off at Hopkins and, of course, on the other side of the lake in Canada. Michael Lee Hill says none of that matters. We'll know more soon enough when they decide to reveal themselves. Mark Zinni, Fox 8 News.
I have to tell you, it's unbelievable what is happening now, and I'd like to say that. Let's go there for a moment. Monsanto is the true Antichrist. Originally, Monsanto was a weapons company that made 2,4-D and Agent Orange and later Paraquat as weapons for the military, and then later got into seed control and seed banks, and then started doing GMOs, or genetically modified organisms. What they did first was take transgenic soybean and made it a delivery system for inoculations. And you will read in the latest papers that are coming out right now that they can use that now for children in inoculating them rather than from a needle. Then 3 years ago, DOD project, this is a Department of Defense project, authorized the studies of altering a specific gene in wheat that activates a bacteria in your gut that you got from a cat. Everybody's got it. If you've stuck your face up next to a cat, you have that infection in your body. It's a specific bacteria, and it's basically inert until this wheat product and this altered gene activates it. When it gets activated, you become what I call a Walmart shopper. you change. And basically, your gut is a lower brain that is convoluted and has neurotransmitters, and you do a lot of decision-making from your gut. And to realize that you are no longer what you eat, but rather you are whom you feed, is a more accurate way to realize that one of the first power tools was to start with structured waters and the foods we ate, because if you wanted to be a spiritual entity, you had to have a physical body to launch from. In fact, the physical body is in fact a scalar or analog of your higher bodies, spiritual. And so a fat doctor doesn't make any sense.
Thank you. We've got a commercial again. Richard Alan Miller, a name you're going to start hearing everywhere, I think, after this interview, just because you sound absolutely prolific. Rick, are you there?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, very good.
Hey, you worry about me. I know, I'm an old, grumpy old man. Sorry about that.
Okay, look, we were just starting to talk about Monsanto and mind control. You were talking about... Monsanto is a weapons company. They're not a GMO company. That's just one thing they do. You know, right. The interesting thing was they were under DuPont. I was basically working for old man DuPont, so I was a Jesuit for the Church of DuPont, and he reported to Rockefeller. That's all changed. Now with the New World Order, Monsanto owns DuPont. How does that work? Well, it's kind of like the U.S. Forest Service owns USDA. You know, the little bureaucracy within the organization takes over. And that's basically, Monsanto is a serious, insidious problem. And people do not have a clue yet. You were going down some great roads right before the break. What I want to ask you here, I'm stumbling on your work with Alan Frey,
and where you got into this situation where I guess he had written, or did you jointly write the holographic concept of reality?
Alan Frey was at Willow Grove. He was out of Willow Grove. He's working for a different government agency and had made this discovery by accident. It then went across Dr. Carl Schleicher's desk, and Schleicher sent it to me for comment. That's when we suggested, oh, this would be perfect for mind control. And off they went, studying the 0.3 to 3 gigahertz. That's what Alan Frey had discovered, that man had another sensory motor input. Basically, what the microwave band did, and I'm writing about that right now, that what it did was that it caused the temporal lobes to heat up slightly and become more compact, and they began to ring. Once they began to ring, you could take the microwave bandwidth and heterodyne voices onto it, and people could actually hear those voices in their head, just like Son of Sam or something of that nature.
Right.
And the problem was, many people do not have what we call inner plane experiences of consciousness, and so they have no idea whether a voice that's inside their head is coming from them or from something outside themselves. And so, of course, the first mode of defense is to simply say, like the Hopi Indian, man has a responsibility for the thoughts he chooses to entertain. In other words, whether that thought came from you or that thought came from somewhere else, why are you choosing to hold it in your mind's eye?
Absolutely.
Well,
okay,
here it is.
Now,
read it in the wave. That's the fleet. And so you started training SEALs and special forces with these concepts so that they could use their belief systems as a tool rather than a driver. If you were a staunch Christian and two aliens walked in the door, the big question is, would you be able to see them? And now, with all of that said, belief systems are important to all of us, and, assumed truths. They're arbitrary, it turns out, and most people don't even know where they came from. They just assume they're correct. Jesus said it, I believe it, and that's that. But, with that said, I have a pair of bell-bottom pants I'm never going to fit in again. But I still keep them, like a belief system, as a reminder. They may not be appropriate for what I'm trying to do. And so you fold them up nice and neat, and you put them in the drawer to pull out later because they're familiar and comfortable with you, like old clothing is. And that's basically what I did. One of the power tools was to train SEALs how to change their belief systems like they would a pair of clothing. Now, in order to do that, you have to be able to witness your behavior. That's a different altered state, and why all the saints have throughout history told the public the importance of meditation and training the mind. That's basically, it's like an unruly little child. It runs all over the place. And, of course, the thoughts you choose to entertain are what happens. And so if you have a doubt, there it is. Merlin put it very succinctly when he said, anything not specifically forbidden is mandatory. That was in a little book by T.H. White. And that concept applies. Whatever is possible, you can count on it. So what you're trying to do is move through the course without ricocheting off walls or creating karma. You're trying to slide through things smoothly. How do you do that? It's called flowing. There is a technique that you can do that will allow you to touch some part of your inner being that has more knowledge than your conscious state does.
Okay. Let me ask you this. I'm noticing here that there was a second paper that you wrote, and you gave the paper at, as it happens, California State College at Sonoma.
Embryonic holography.
University, and I'm reading it. And you were dealing with an AI database for paranormal.
Yes, we had the first artificial intelligent computer with a 360 at the University of Washington. It had serendipity and synergy access protocols. And this was way before we had concepts of quantum algorithms, quantum computation algorithms, and some of the other forming networking that we have today. And what I did, that was called Project Paraphile,
where we created, and that's not been written out, so I don't know where you found about that, but that's interesting. Yes, we did that at the Omniversal. At the same time, I presented a second paper called Embryonic Holography, which was an application to the holographic concept of reality. And the holographic concept of reality then became a model that has been used by the military for understanding the universe, even over that of a quantum universe. Entanglement, the quantum universe will have entanglement and decoherence, and that's where you can have a particle that is simply related to another particle, and they could both be at opposite ends of the universe, but the one is somehow related to the other. That is called the Bose-Einstein condensate. In a holographic universe, we would suggest that it is the same particle with two cameras on it. So you're getting two levels of a hologram, and you're confusing planes. And that is a more accurate way to approach the universe as holographic in nature. And that part, the embryonic holography, showed how it applied to biological processes from Ravitz and Burr out of Northridge and several other universities, Yale. Northrop and Burr were at Yale. Ravitz was at Northridge. There were others that were doing these concepts, which led to the math that you're familiar with now called fractal math. Basically, if a hologram is a certain size, like a Mandelbrot generator, the next size up has a specific size to it or dimension, just like going from the physical plane to the emotional plane, intellectual plane. And these are all centered around the geometry of specific neurotransmitters, like lysergic acid amide or N-N-dimethyltryptamine or ketamine or some of the other brain chemistries that we have similar to designer drugs that we take.
Okay, but I also noticed that 1 week after you delivered this paper at Sonoma State University, which is actually a school that I graduated from.
Oh, that was a long time ago. That was during the Kohoutek conference is what it was called, when we thought the Earth was going to get hit by a comet called Kohoutek.
I see. And 4 men came into your place of business, it says, 2 in suits and 2 in full army dress, and put you under arrest.
Oh, yes. What happened was I was working for Navy intelligence, and Army intelligence came into Seattle and took all my files. The paper that I sent you, if you have a copy of the embryonic holography, was written a second time because the first version of that was classified top secret, and I had no notes to work from other than my memory. And that was when it was first published in Psychedelic Essays and Monographs out of Boca Raton, a long time ago.
Okay, but you wrote the paper, the original paper, and they classified it so that you couldn't even see it. Isn't that right?
That's right. Yeah, that's how it works. Yeah. I've been there, done that. That's frequent. That's often very frequent because you might make a suggestion of how the brain, in my paper, how the brain processes information, and at that time, it was essential. That was the key element for understanding how synthetic telepathy might be used. By the way, synthetic telepathy now is the primary first ordinance used by everything. If you look at Afghanistan and they list all the ordinances, the airplanes and the bombs and the rifles and the bullets and everything that were used, at the very top, before anything happened, on both invasions of Iraq, for example, was Commando Solo, and that's that single aircraft. And you can go on Wikipedia and read about it. It's all using synthetic telepathy.
Okay, and when you're talking about synthetic telepathy, can you please describe exactly what that is?
Yeah, that was Alan. It was all based on Alan Frey's work. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, but specifically, because you're talking about synthetics, you're talking about what, silicon?
Well, it's working microwave. In other words, it's not really SP. What we were doing was causing the temporal lobes to ring, and once they ring, you could heterodyne voices on the base carrier form of the microwave band, and you could actually hear them in your head without going through processes. That had to do, again, with resonant physics and the way biological organisms will scale up or scale down something in terms of amplification of information. Resonant cavity oscillators, I believe, is the right word to use.
You're talking about turning soldiers, getting them to take orders?
No, mostly it would be as a communication system if everything went down. That's why they developed HAARP as well. Esalen and some of the others, when we were involved in that, they wanted to use my frequency bands, and they wanted to put a second station after Nick Begich wrote Angels Don't Play This Harp. He's my publisher, by the way. When they did that, then the second facility, when Europe started going sideways on the whole thing, was down in Australia, in central Australia, near Adelaide. And what they were doing was trying to set up a global screen of these frequency bands like you would an ongoing commercial in your head all the time. You couldn't turn it off. And it didn't work. In fact, what did happen is even more weird with HAARP. But my website will have some recent blogs on how it's messing up the ionosphere and how it pushes this way and it causes that. I do not think that the global events of weather change that we are currently enjoying is related specifically or wholly to HAARP. I believe it is part of a much larger problem of a small group of people trying to control the weather.
Okay,
and
but
let me tell you,
they
can control the weather now.
Hello?
Yes?
Are you familiar with the nano satellite grid?
The which? Nano?
Nano satellite grid.
No, I'm not. What is that about?
Oh, have you ever heard of Mother?
No. Okay, now you're getting into areas that I, realize I'm just out of the closet. I have been in recluse for 35 years. Now what I'm doing for Navy, I'm back working for Navy Intelligence, of course. You never really get out of that club. I have a handler. Actually, he refers to himself as a wrangler. Wrangler is the person that handles small children and animals on set, and they consider me a loose cannon. So basically what I do now is I network rural communities and bunkers for congressmen like Dennis Kucinich. Kucinich would refer to me as the postman because I have a photographic, it isn't a photographic memory. What I have is an eidetic memory, very special. And as such, it makes me kind of weird because I don't forget anything. I'm like a 4-year-old that never became 7. I have the same inquisitive, I'm going to check out, Mother. You can count your socks on that one. Find out what that's all about. Nano satellites.
I'm thrilled to death to hear that because I love it when I can get a person I'm talking to connect the dots. And because I talk to so many different people, if they would only talk to each other, we'd really get somewhere.
Well, that's what you're so good about. I would think you're a more interesting person to interview than even me because of all the weird people you have interviewed. You can only guess what you think.
I think you're really you're one of the top type of interviews that I would ever prefer to do, to tell you the truth, because you've got an incredible vast knowledge in your brain, and it's just a matter of getting to it. Pulsed microwave is what you call this voice to skull transmission.
That is correct. What they would do, the frequency band was 0.3 to 3 gigahertz. And what that band, low amplitude, which means you could use it in space. You don't need sound. And this is like an advanced communication system in man that has basically not been developed or noticed until recently. And so, of course, like diet and all the rest of it, can we use this to manipulate the masses? Yes, of course you can. Because with awareness, then comes, the potential of defenses and how to, strategize. But as it stands, the pulsed microwave radiation, what that does is it stimulates and heats up. Literally, it's like your temporal lobe is like a piezoelectric crystal. It's like a liquid sack of fluids. Actually, they're amorphous semiconductors, to be precise, which means there's something far more interesting going on there than just being a sack of fluid getting heated up in a microwave oven. And that's basically what happened. The temporal lobes would start to ring from being heated. They would swell and heat. Seems like there's no toxicity or LD50 ratios on that. And in the studies I saw, in the early studies, we couldn't find any problems with it. Low amplitude, causing it to ring. Now, once the temporal lobe was ringing like a little bell, then you could heterodyne voices, audio, onto that carrier, and you could hear it in your head through, we don't know yet, that's still unknown, what kind of resonant cavity oscillators are stepping it up as biological amplification so you can hear it.
Okay, we've got a commercial. We'll be right back. Miller, all about mind control and consciousness and a whole slew of other things from a very sophisticated perspective, I have to say. Rick, can you continue to talk about how mind control is actually being used, and I understand that your understanding or perhaps being up to date on what HAARP can and can't do might be somewhat limited. At least that's the way you're coming across with this at the moment. But if you understand, for example, the use of television in this scenario, how would you place that?
Well, I could give you a direct quote from the CIA. Mind control. We don't need mind control. We have TV. That's a direct quote from the 70s. Okay. I don't know if you watch your husband or your neighbors when they watch TV and how they start to drool and their eyes glaze over. And there is a mindlessness to it that engages other parts of your brain. And that's why we call it the Mozart effect, for example, when everybody loves classical music. Why? Because it is exercising portions of the brain that have not otherwise been exercised, and it loves it. And so it can't get enough of it. And TV is a similar thing. It's activating your occipital region of the cerebral cortex, which is where most people relate to reality, is visually, and rather than audio. And audio is a second major input. Feelings are a third one. But, we have many different senses, even at the foundation. When Dr. Ryan moved across the street and it became the foundation for the study of man, it was the big house where they put all the weird children and did those studies. That place was always interested in the paranormal forms of consciousness and what people could do when they were in certain states or altered states of consciousness. God gave you these things as gifts. They're not to be shunned.
Absolutely. I would agree with you 100%. Can you please talk a little bit more about what house across the street where they put the special kids?
The foundation. Okay. During the studies at the Foundation for the Study of Man, which was in Durham, across the street, it was a 4-story building, just like in the movies, and it had kids, young kids. I was taken there in the 50s myself because of my memory thing, my sister and I. My mother was a real famous psychic in the 30s. She had worked with my grandmother on the Seattle Police Department finding bodies and things, and they did a TV series called One Step Beyond. And so, of course, in the 50s, they went through and tested the children to see if there were genetic relationships to ESP. There wasn't, but in doing so, they discovered I was a 4th-stage telepath. That means that I can, with my thought alone, I can make you see things in your mind's eye. You can see it. You can get it. Once you can see something in your mind's eye, it becomes real. And it's like magic. Magic is a higher form of physics. It was reserved for the ultra-elite of Europe for centuries. It was only this last century when Crowley advocated the use of drugs as a valid form of magic, which it is, has a lot of danger and risks, and realize, I always like to end that talk with Crowley dying as a drug addict in Hastings. And remember, I said a teacher can only take you as far as they themselves have gone, and Crowley died as a drug addict. So back then, they didn't even understand things like addiction or what that truly meant. Laudanum and the use of certain kinds of morphine derivatives at that period of time in history was relative. I mean, people knew that it wasn't right, but they didn't have the definitions of what really is going on. It's interesting because, for example, there's a friend of mine, Rick Strassman, has written a book about witch burnings in France and in the 17th century. And every single witch burning he was able in that period, in that area, was able to be traced to ergot poisoning. In other words, people had gotten poisoned with ergot in the bakery and were hallucinating, had no concept of what a hallucination was about, of course thought they were involved with the devil. And, of course, the Catholic Church, that's the last chapter in Strassman's book, suggests that the Catholic Church was using LSD or ergot in ritual 100 years earlier and were perpetrating this misconception of what altered states were about as a way to control the populace. Today, we're doing the same thing with our foods. And it's unbelievable because people have no concept that the body, if you look at the physical body, human body, it's mostly bacteria. Very little of it is human. I would say less than 10% is you, and the rest of it are all these different bacteria and water transport systems vying for a level ball field. That's why homeostasis for everybody is quite different. And it comes down to your diet, because it's not you are what you eat, but whom you feed. And in terms of you are what you eat, that would be audio, which means even if something were wrong, one of the first things we would train a Navy SEAL is not to say it, because saying it would make him hear it, and that would reinforce that part of the belief system or a doubt or the possibility of something. And so, you had to be very careful. A man had a responsibility for what he says. Man has a responsibility for the thoughts he chooses to entertain. I mean, there's a whole list of Hopi proverbs, if you will, that's where they came from, that basically teach one how to become a Superman by controlling your thoughts. And your thoughts are what create your reality. And it's called thought forms. And the mathematical equations of consciousness that are in my ESP book, they all came from Yugoslavia and basically looked at thought forms as durations of energy going into a question or a thought form, and the more you do it, the stronger it comes out. I believe they called that in Tantric Yoga sex magic. The thought that occurs at the moment of climax happens. That was the principal centered forms around magic and how to create or change realities. You could use that sexual energy. In voodoo, they used blood. It was all working with higher forms of emotions above the physical plane. And then, of course, there are higher planes to that as you become more integrated with internal structures and, your internal landscape.
Absolutely. Okay. So, and very, very well said. And I think that's great food for thought, literally, for the people listening.
Because these technologies are so godlike, and I use that term very precisely, because if you understand how the fundamental structure of the universe really works, and you then construct technologies that allow you to manipulate those forces directly, you have the command and control of not only energy and unlimited resources, but you also probably have technologies that can interfere with the so-called natural biological life cycles of human beings or other living creatures on Earth. And lifespans can be extended probably thousands or even maybe tens of thousands of years because of the ability to repair entropic breakdown of DNA and you know the ends of DNA. Those telomeres is what they're called, which seem to control our aging, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So this breakaway civilization, if Dolan and I and Joseph and Lavenda and Timothy and others are correct, there is almost no way to realistically calibrate how far ahead of us they are. I would say, using our crude historical rule of thumb, they could be 1,000 years ahead of us by now, even though it's only 50 years. Now, think about that. I mean, just think about that. If you have a group of fanatic, dedicated Nazis with their perspective on the rest of human beings, humanity on Earth, where they consider most of humanity, which is not white and blonde-haired, to be basically a primitive, inferior species, how would a civilization imbued with technological capabilities that allow them to, at some level, even move planets, let me repeat that, to actually move celestial objects? Because remember, this allows you to negate inertia and gravity and control the forces of gravity so you could set up your own orbits, et cetera, et cetera. If those types of capabilities are in the hands of Nazis, like we've seen in all those movies, I mean, we are in deep, deep trouble. And that is the focus of this conference, to explore the scientific evidence that, in fact, that has, in fact, occurred.
Farrell talked about even the bailout money being tied into this. Basically, obviously, there must be a question here of how this thing is or was then at least funded. I mean, if they're so advanced at this point, they could probably go out there, get whatever resource they would want, gold, diamonds, oil, what have you, things we don't even might know about at this point. But how do you think that this thing was started?
Let me stop you there, because I think you raised a really important point. I presume you have watched Star Trek, right?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Gene Roddenberry, my dear departed friend, created this amazing vision of a human race living and working together and encountering alien species and living and working together with them in the so-called Federation of Planets, right? And from time to time, they will have scripts or story arcs where people who are still primitive like us, meaning that they are dealing with limited resources, limited energy, limited environment, living space, etc., encounter representatives of the Federation. And it was Gene's great pride to talk about how at that point in time we will have bypassed the concept of money, of possession, of big stuff. Not personal stuff, but big stuff. And the reason is just what you said. If you can tap the real forces of the universe, if you can provide access through some technological means to unlimited pollutionless energy in whatever form you desire, be it coherent, like electricity, radio technology, radio waves, lasers, whatever, or incoherent, like heat, just to keep yourself warm, and that allows you then to manipulate the resources of an entire solar system, or, and this is probably going to raise some eyebrows, to create matter out of nothing, out of empty space itself, out of the ether, which I have seen experiments that demonstrate that that's possible with this physics, then you don't need money. You don't need the kind of primitive economy that we are dealing with. But reversing your question, who in that larger picture would still need money, and a lot of it, if they in fact are looking forward to some cataclysmic, shall we say, change in the planet here itself in the foreseeable future? Obviously, the terrestrial representatives of this breakaway civilization here on Earth, still kept, still trapped, still here with within our civilization and amongst us. And if you wanted to identify a class of people that would describe, I think I'm describing the banksters. I think describing the people who run the world, because they do control the money of our primitive economy and society. And so all these trillions of dollars that are going into some black hole, because it's certainly not going into what it's being purported that they were being, taken from taxpayers to be used for. I think that is a stash or a secret fund or a basically pirate treasure that these rip-off artists are taking from the rest of us, so they can somehow carve out their own separate civilization when push comes to shove, and these other guys decide that they no longer need 6 billion of us on planet Earth. And that time appears to be approaching from the circumstantial evidence we're seeing, given the rate at which things are accelerating in the financial markets, in terms of global geology, in terms of very bizarre anomalies taking place around the Earth. So I think not only are we looking at a secret space program, but we're probably looking now at a secret space war being fought between those on Earth who are trying to maintain their position and those out there who have finally decided that if we continue along our present track, we will become a competition for them, and they cannot allow that. They cannot, afford to have that happen, and so they are taking steps to basically quarantine us here on Earth. And I believe that the evidence will support that they are using this extraordinary technology for some demonstrations of the awful power they possess in terms of blackmailing governments on this planet to do their bidding, to stay home and not become competitors.
See, it's a very interesting point. I want to, ask you about the representatives here as well. I mean, the Nazis always comes up as the arch villain, it seems like, and I don't think a lot of people would agree that many of the banksters that you mentioned are kind of Aryan Germans at this point.
Hang on a second.
Yeah.
We know from Levenda's work, we know from Dolan, we know from Joseph Farrell, that in fact the banksters bankrolled the Nazis. They created the Nazis. They during the 20s and 30s and 40s, they were the ones who were totally behind them. What I think we might be seeing is an expression from an old movie now, when thieves fall out. Because I believe what they did not understand is that they were pawns too. They thought they were the masters of the universe. And they've now found out, to their extraordinary shock and surprise, that there is much victims and in prison here. I mean, we have an American author. I don't know whether you ever had him on your show. His name is Alex Jones, and he runs a website called prisonplanet.com.
Sure.
I think Alex Jones has absolutely got it correct. We are on, if this model is accurate, a prison planet, and someone now is trying to keep us from breaking out.
But who, again, if we go back to this idea, and this is the difficult part here, who is the elite and also what is the ideology behind them? Because I believe, just as you said, I think that the Nazis were set up in order to fulfill the agenda of somebody much higher, if you will, up on this hierarchy, on this ladder of things. So what if we go into this aspect of talking about some of the motives here, the philosophy that is driving this? I mean, if it's only and solely was a Nazi agenda, then at this point, if the point here was to eradicate as many people as possible, why wouldn't they have done so already? If we look at it from that point of view, and if it's not Nazis at the ultimate tip of this pyramid, who is doing this, Richard? Who's behind it?
Well, you have to again back off and look at this from a big perspective. Again, in the timeline that Farrell and Lavenda and Dolan and I are looking at. We're looking at the events from World War II leading to a breakaway group of Nazis with this control of technology and physics, able to live anywhere they want to. But it's a relatively tiny group of people to start with. Now, you can live anywhere you want to, but is anywhere you want to as nice as Earth? Remember, in the entire solar system, the only planet where you can walk on beaches and look at sunsets and admire aurora and basically live as, you know, we have been living for thousands of years without technology is here. So even if you command these extraordinary forces, you cannot remake entire planets within, let's say, 60 years. So Earth is still the place that you probably want to, if not live, at least vacation. And to do that, you need the accommodation of various governments so that you have some kind of a modus vivendi where you leave them alone and they leave you alone. I mean, 6 billion people working day and night produce a lot of stuff that whoever is running the show, even from off planet, could probably benefit from. It's not so much that the Nazis were out to exterminate everybody. They were out to exterminate certain competing groups. Remember, like the Masons, who had the same occult ideas that the Nazis did, and then, of course, they were competitors, so they had to be eliminated. The same way with the Jews. They were another group of competing peoples, because if you look back in Jewish tradition, particularly the work of Stan Tenen at the Meru Foundation, you'll find the roots of this physics in Hebrew documentation extending back all the way through the Torah. The keys to this physics are in some of the most ancient sacred documents on planet Earth. And it turns out that those are the peoples that the Nazis targeted for extinction, for extermination. Because if you eliminate the people in terms of, let's say, the Jewish faith, you eliminate the carrier wave of the very physics that allows you to control them. So again, it was about eliminating competition. Ultimately, I don't believe that this group is out to destroy 6 billion people on the Earth. I think you're going to let nature try to do that because the physics of the planet itself is changing in a cyclic pattern. And we can see that in various records, like from the U.S. Geological Survey, which shows us that earthquakes and volcanoes and major geological disturbances have been on a monotonic increase for the last several decades. Well, our physics model predicts, in fact, when you look at the solar system, when you look at NASA data, you see planetary changes all over the solar system, which I think are part of a huge natural cycle of this physics, which has to do with alignments, where planets are relative to the center of the galaxy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we're looking at very long time cycles. If they have had a capability of true space flight, meaning anti-gravity, not stupid things like rockets, the shuttle, Saturn V's, whatever, if they've had true anti-gravity for 60 years, then obviously if they went to the moon, there are stunning technological secrets and physics secrets to be found and gained there, if only because there will be libraries. And they will be translatable libraries because, you know, the language of science and physics is all the same. No matter where you are in the universe, it's the same physics. So once you get access to those ancient records from a solar system civilization that I believe is equivalent to Kardashev's famed Type 2 civilization in his 3 classes. Remember how the Russian astrophysicist Kardashev coined the phrase Type 1, Type 2, Type 3? One civilization controls the energy of its planet. A Type 2 controls the energy of its star, meaning its entire solar system. And a Type 3 would control the energies of an entire galaxy. Well, if you have that capability in the hands of primitive Nazis, I mean, God help us. because by going out into the solar system, they will have had the ability to pick and choose the best of what was left after the cataclysmic effects of millions of years ago, which led to the destruction of this much larger, much more ancient civilization. Again, as we have looked at the data and have tried to put the pieces back together, and that, of course, puts them, as I said, roughly maybe 1,000 years ahead of where we are now in terms of capability and accelerating. So yeah, I think we are facing a absolute breakpoint in civilization. I think this conference is perfectly timed. And again, the good news is we are not totally defenseless, because the banksters, to their credit, because they were obviously concerned about being double-crossed at some point as well, appear to have developed a whole bunch of toys that are now being used to confront these guys and to essentially produce some kind of stalemate or standoff. Otherwise, you and I would not be having this conversation. And it's that unknown, untabulated, undeclared war that we have to explore with all our resources, all of us independent researchers and scientists and policy people, in an effort to change the course of history and, in fact, reassert a human being's right to live here on planet Earth undisturbed.
And an unwitting public, there's a reason why they keep it on that level. I mean, there's a lot of people here, and again, that's a lot of manpower, force, and if you want to look at it that way, military or personnel. They can't help in a way. Would that just make the situation worse, do you think, if this in some way was announced or publicly, declared? Somebody put the cards on the table here and told it like it is.
Did you ever read the works of Charles Fort?
No, I haven't, actually.
Are you familiar with his works?
Some of it.
Even by type?
Some of it, yeah.
Okay. Back in, I think it was the 30s or 40s, he wrote a book called The Book of the Damned, which I thought was a very peculiar title. I think Charles Fort understood what we've been discussing now, because he basically makes the statement in that book, we are property. The only way he could explain the anomalies he saw, even in those early decades of the 20th century, was to come to the conclusion that we are property of someone who has much more muscle and much more capability than human beings currently have. If that's true, then whoever wins this secret war wants us to remain property. And the one thing that would change that equation is if human beings realized they were property. Yeah. And that's what they're trying to keep us from knowing, and that's our job, is to promulgate this far and wide with the evidence, so in fact human beings can reassert their natural heritage to this planet and take back control of their lives. And it's not undoable, it's just going to be very hard, and for a lot of people it's going to be a terrible shock to find out that most of which they've been taught for their entire lives is absolutely flat-ass wrong, if I can say that on radio.
You definitely can. No worries about that, Richard. Is there a timeline here as well that is being kept? Because in some cases, I'm surprised that certain things haven't unfolded, if I put it that way. And again, how bad do you think things are if we look at these cataclysmic cycle that you mentioned before, natural disasters and so forth as well? Is this going to increase now then, and does that play into this idea of a timeline being kept here, Richard?
I believe so. I think for a kind of useful rule of thumb for the model, we can say that this is all pegged to 2012. That the clock is ticking down to 2012 because that's when some major geophysical problem could occur on Earth that would quietly eliminate most of their population problem. And by not alerting the appropriate authorities or giving them on Earth the appropriate technology to deal with that physics, they can basically wash their hands and say, look, it wasn't us, it was just nature, and they were too damn dumb and stupid to figure it out in time to save themselves.
Right.
In other words, it's a very clever head game. Now, why would that kind of a game need to go on? That raises the question, is there a larger civilization out there in the galaxy watching, seeing who is going to do what, who is going to win, and is there some kind of prime directive in operation, a la my friend Gene, where they cannot intervene directly, but if we ask for help, if we understand that we're not alone, if we take certain measures to assert that new knowledge, they in fact are then allowed to intervene and help us, keep these beasts at bay. Our vice president yesterday made a very interesting case. He actually used a term that I have not heard for a long time. He talked about barbarians at the gate, and everyone thought he was talking in a certain direction about events occurring politically here in the United States. I'm wondering if in fact he was talking to another audience about a different set of barbarians who in fact are at the gates unless we take drastic action and become very much more self-aware.
Regarding the implantation of an RFID chip into his body. My other guest, Bob Boyce, just had a device removed from him. These guys are not hallucinating. This is going on and is totally real. And this is signed from Jim Guest, State Representative, 5th District from Missouri House of Representatives. I have been acquainted with Mr. James Walbert for over 3 years and his personal struggle to get relief from the continuing electronic harassment, physical abuse, and intimidation he is subjected to. There is a sound medical evidence and medical evaluation to verify
ever doing it, had a plan, had prior experience, and knows what they're doing.
So this is the first case in the courts in U.S. history of something like this. Am I correct?
Yes. Nobody has ever been able to substantiate and prove electronic stalking or electronic harassment.
A lot of folks out there, this may have happened to them. They may be targeted individuals, but they don't have all the backing, all of the toxicological evaluations, all the hematological reports.
Having nervous system stimulations and like neural disruptions, I shake really bad. It'll heat up, it'll blister. At least I don't see anything that's comparable to other victims, daily, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It doesn't stop. Being stalked on my job, I lost my job because I was being stalked. I woke up, I had blood all in my mouth. It was all down in my ears. It was a sloppy job, whoever did it. Call and make up lies. They will propagate situations that aren't real. They will take measures that are indicative to like gaslighting or gang stalking. It seems that no matter how much evidence I present to people, they absolutely refuse to do their job. I presented everything to the police department. They have done nothing but ridicule me, reject me, make comments that are just completely ridiculous. They have done nothing about it at all. I was able to substantiate and prove my case in front of a judge. Twice I had to go through 2 judges to make sure that this protection order got issued, and they still did nothing. They came out to my house and made fun of me. And this guy's supervisor came out and made his punishment was to sit out in front of the apartment complex all night long, basically poking fun at me.
Him calling me, asking me, what I was doing with James. Didn't I know he was off, or basically not.
One of the countermeasures, you sleep in a copper cage.
He has no, financial support, which is part of the problem, part of the course of being harassed, is to put him under, basically.
The playing field in your whole life has been completely changed, and your perception of life, your value of life, all of those things have changed now.
He approached me and started telling me that he was going to start stalking me with this equipment, that he had done this to people before and got away with it, and he was, there's no chance that he's going to get caught because no one will believe me, and so this guy has had this, execution of his crime down pat. He's had prior knowledge as well as prior, experience. I mean, obviously they placed implants in my body with intentions. Neuroprosthetic implants in my ears. These things are designed to alter and stimulate my nervous system. So, whoever done this, had prior knowledge to doing it. I would have never suspected this guy.
James, when you go to the courthouse, are there reporters there?
No, actually.
Nobody even shows up, huh? Has local media, television, will they touch this story?
No, they won't. No, they won't.
This is too scary for people.
They had discussed removal, and then all of a sudden, they weren't willing to work on it anymore.
Concerned about threats. Very fearful to get involved for fear that they would shut down his facility or they would have some type of financial backlash.
I handed him the x-rays, and he looked at it, and then he handed them back and told me point blank, that's a government chip. I will not take it out, and I don't think you'll find another doctor in the U.S. that will take it out.
With my case being posted, we have now experienced 20 states that have passed these laws. 17 of them have been emergency laws. And several investigators I spoke with feel that these people are now making moves at the legislative level to protect themselves. Are there a lot more victims out there that actually don't know that they're victims? Why did they pass these laws under emergency conditions? And these laws,
and so fast, and nobody heard anything about it. We can pass all these laws, and we can do them real fast in front of you, but the fact that you need a doctor to help you, that's not an emergency. And, I don't even want to do anything. I don't want to get anyone near that. It's pathetic to me. The whole thing is pathetic, and there's some people behind this. There's going to be a big showdown.
I was able to track that it was from Verichip based on his RFID signature, and now that we actually have physical possession of the chip, I believe it was Raytheon Corporation actually makes them for Verichip. And I had picked up EMF radiation from my shoulder using an EMF meter. We have not been able to find this chip in the public database, which means that it must be within the lot of chips sold to the government, namely NSA buys these in bulk lots, and we don't have access to the NSA database, obviously, to verify who this was issued to in order to implant me.
Verichip is now referred to as positive ID or PSID.
Positive ID.
I can't imagine why. Has veered off the track of normalities with this particular type of the controversial subject of being implanted in controversial subject of mind control and physiological control. I'm not real sure what would motivate a human being to do this to somebody else. That to me is very criminal. It's very sociopathic. It's very morbid. If there's anybody that should be getting a crazy label here, I would venture to say it would be the person that's committing the crime against myself. I would never just sit around watching TV and think, hey, I'm going to go put an implant in somebody and abuse them.
The RFID chip was an idea that I was fully aware of when I worked with Walter Boert, who wrote the book Operation Mind Control. I've heard of this before. This is the first time I've heard it in a federal court case issue. I want to congratulate you for doing all the steps that most people cannot do. You're part of history now. This is a much bigger picture because I think everybody deserves to understand what is really at stake.
Are you being stalked, harassed, and your privacy violated? Has your work and personal life been sabotaged or ruined and you don't know why? Are you experiencing trouble with your phone, email, and internet services? Are you being denied help from governing and city officials? You are not alone.
As many as one person per 100 are being targeted in North America.
Same tactics get thrown on this list and
technological and community-based harassment. Gang stalking or group stalking, groups of people stalking an individual.
Street harassment.
This is exactly what is happening to me.
My name is James Walbert. I am from Wichita, Kansas. I am a targeted individual for the gain of intellectual properties. In the year 2004, I was responsible for the very first order of protection issued against illegal tracking technologies, illegal human tracking, as well as any and all energized devices designed to track the human nervous system or affect the human nervous system. My claims have been backed up by famous private investigators, as well as famous toxicologists, congressional member, state representative of the House of Missouri, Jim Guest, as well as congressional member Todd Tiahrt. My story has been published in 50,000 magazines and 14 times sold on newsstands. I've had several interviews with State Representative Jim Guest and several congressional members doing radio shows with him, as well as my issue is addressing House bills that are consistent with Alaska Senate Bill 293, Colorado House Bill 1082, Missouri House Bill 550, which has now moved into Missouri House Bill 2041, New Hampshire House Bill 686, North Dakota House Bill J020, Ohio Senate Bill 126, California Senate Bill 362, which now has been made into California Civil Penal Code 52.7, as well as Georgia Senate Bill 235, State of Oklahoma, State of Tennessee, the State of Virginia, the State of Washington, Wisconsin. These House bills address the concerning issue of illegal drugging and implantation of a tracking chip for any reason, to whether an employer would coerce you into taking one or whether somebody was to force you to take one. This issue is very prevalent. Obviously, we have now 21 states that have moved to enact laws against this, Senate bills and House bills. They're enacting these laws to address the problem of illegal drugging and chipping and tracking. This seems to be a very prevalent problem in our country today. I work with thousands of victims across the country as well as across the world that are suffering from these instances. My evidence can be backed up by famous private investigator William J. Taylor, as well as Melinda Kidder, State Representative Jim Guest, Congressional Member Todd Tiahrt, Dr. Hector Fernandez, as well as the famous Dr. John Hall, and several other famous individuals. You can find my story on the internet, as well as many court cases. We'll go back to the year 2009, where I was very successful in proving to the Sedgwick County courts. It would be case 08DM8264. That would be the court docket number for the case. That case addresses technologies that previously that have never been addressed. The case actually has issued a protection order against any and all energized devices designed to track the human nervous system, to disrupt the human nervous system, or to affect the human nervous system. So in essence, I was able to prove that the fictitious weapons that are being claimed about today from other targeted individuals are more than likely a relevant concern. Not only are they relevant, we also have people that are experiencing drugging, tracking, chipping, as well as people being gang stalked, people breaking into their homes. These are illegal, erroneous acts against us. We're being tried and basically sought out for our personal properties. I became a victim in 2004 with threats of handing over intellectual properties, or that I would simply be discredited from the crime that I'm suffering from by just simply reporting the crime. What my goal is, by addressing any congressional members, is that for these laws to be revised and as well as enacted and enforced. It was our Senates as well as our Houses that passed these laws. I'm asking for implementation of these laws, for them to be enforced. These laws, people are reporting these crimes and nothing is being done. These people are being labeled erroneously. They've done nothing wrong. They are simply just reporting the crime as instructed. So upon reporting the crime, a lot of them are stripped of evidence, their homes are broken into, and they're stalked off their jobs. They're usually discredited by any point of relevant matter that has to do with an authoritative figure of any kind. In 2010, I had spoke to the Bioethics Committee the President Obama had appointed to basically go over illegal, non-ethical medical testings that had been occurring in the United States as well as out of the United States, but that were responsible by the United States. I was flown out to Washington, D.C. I spoke in front of the Bioethics Committee. They were appointed by President Obama. I spoke directly to them for 2 minutes even, and I was able to address several very important issues. Bills against these particular claims. I found it to be very compelling as well as very concerning. The fact that they were able to just easily dismiss this and is such a state of not caring. I mean, that's basically what we have been seeing. Even the Bioethics Committee seemed to be very empty and very cold-hearted about it. They didn't really seem to address much of the evidence that any of us were presenting. And the evidence that I'm able to present, like I had stated, to reiterate, they these are not letters from my next door neighbor. These are letters that have been issued from congressional members, legislative members, famous private investigators. These are medical doctors making these claims. Clinical psychologists are vouching for me. PhD psychologists are also standing up in my corner. I also have several court cases that I've won against the technology. So again, you know, I come up back to the concerning conclusion that are we suffering from government corruption? I mean, are these targeted individuals, including myself, are we victims of non-consensual illegal military testing, and we are just simply being denied any due process, any judicial relief of any kind, as well as any recognition of validity? Anything that we say is simply dismissed. It seems to be pushed aside. So it's a very concerning subject for myself.
Well, perhaps I could just ask a question and then maybe somebody on your team can answer it.
Go ahead.
I was on the Corn and Grand Bayou today, and the stench from the sinkhole was strong enough to cause nausea, coughing, and stinging eyes. I'm sure many of the residents have experienced the same for some time now. That's not a dangerous level necessarily for a very brief exposure. It's the sort of thing.
Is that a question?
Yes. Yes, because the question would not be understandable without this. It is a dangerous level for chronic exposure. I'm a biomedical scientist. I know what I'm talking about. The question is, what kind of medical monitoring has been placed in this community by a dependable and respectable organization?
Sorry, that's really a question you can ask someone afterwards, because there's nobody here to answer it. Right.
Nobody here in the community knows whether there's a medical monitoring situation.
Okay, come on up.
If members of the community don't have an answer to that, then it must mean that such medical monitoring has not been made adequately available to them.
Okay, sir, you asked a question, we'll get it answered, and we're not here for you to give us. If you have some information to give to us, I'd really appreciate it.
I just did.
Absolutely, positively. I just want the residents to also have.
You need to be monitored for asthma, increased asthma. You need to be monitored for respiratory difficulties. You need to be monitored for reproductive health problems. You need to be monitored for a number of medical issues which have been seen in other areas, such as the Gulf, where the BP blowout is still causing medical problems today, 2 years later. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Dionne Dugan with the Department of Health and Hospitals.
Hold that mic up, please.
Hi, I'm Dionne Dugan with the Department of Health and Hospitals. The question I'm answering is there a plan from DHH to do medical monitoring at this time? And all along, the Department of Health and Hospitals has reviewed all environmental sampling data that's been provided to us by Department of Environmental Quality. And at this point, we haven't found levels where we would expect health effects. But we are willing to, any health complaints or health concerns you have, you certainly can call us, and we will be glad to follow up, or you can call Mr. John Boudreau, and he'll refer it to us.
Projects agency known as DARPA, also from Naval Intelligence. There's also a document from the CIA. And I've looked over them, and I've familiarized myself with them very, very carefully over the past few days while I'm trying to recover. This information needs to be released to the public. And what that information is this. In 1995, our government commissioned a project to place into the public water supply, into the public food distribution system, a very small device, a nano-sized device with a microprocessor. It is an electronic device, and it is about the size of 1 or 2 grains of sand. It took years to develop, but they developed it, they've perfected the technology, they've tested it, and as of today, according to their estimates, 85% of the population has one of these devices inside of their bodies. Now these, you could say you're infected, in other words. You have been infected with one of these devices. They're incredibly small. They can barely be seen with the naked eye. They have to be removed from the medium that they are suspended in. It could be food, it could be water, but if you take it out and if you put it on a table, preferably a black surface, and you look at it, you're going to be able to see it. It's very hard, it's opaque, but let me put it this way, you'd never know it was there. If you've consumed it, which you probably have, as I said, 87% of the population has one of these in their bodies, right, as presently, as the military has estimated. Okay, so what is it? Why did the military develop this device and put it in the water supply and try to basically infect the entire U.S. population with it? Well, it's a very simple device, folks. It is designed to kill you. It is designed to terminate you. That's what it does. It's very simple. It doesn't really do anything else. Now, how does it kill you? It goes something like this. It is, again, the size of a grain of sand or so, a little bit bigger. It is a nano device. It contains a microprocessor. It contains a receiver. And it can receive a transmission, radio transmission. Once it receives this radio transmission, which is very specific, and can only, it's something, let me put it this way, it is a frequency that is only our military uses and only knows about. It's not going to just be randomly activated while you're walking down the street. So it's activated by this signal. Now, how do they do it? Well, their cell towers cover 98% of this country in terms of coverage. Cell towers, radio towers. In addition to that, our military has spent about 5 years setting up a proprietary system, that of coverage, not in addition to the cell towers. So what they've done in any large population center, they have installed transmitters, very small, and they're in strategic locations. They cover every block of every large city and even small cities, and this has been set up over the past 5 years. The reason they want to do that is they want to be able to target these populations very specifically in a very small locality. Okay? Now, what do these devices do? Okay, they kill you. How do they do it? I don't know fully, but what they do is it induces flu-like symptoms in the body. It causes the body to release antibodies that, in addition to causing flu-like symptoms, it will cause your body to produce antibodies that are indicative of a flu virus infection. You will die within 10 to 12 days. The effectiveness, is what they call it in their documents, is 98%. That means 98% of people with which this device is implanted or they are infected with this device, once it is activated with the radio signal, 98% of people are dead within 10 to 12 days. 2% recover. And the recovery reasons are not fully known. It is often outside influences. It could be a malfunction of the device. Right now our military wants to get it to 99%. It's at 98 right now. Basically, if this device has been activated in a population area, let's say they use a cell tower to send a signal out, you're going to see everybody around you, including yourself, sick with a very severe case of what appears to be the flu. You'll go to the doctor, they won't be able to help you, it will continue to get progressively worse. Your lungs are going to fill up with fluid. In fact, that's going to be a symptom that will be very pronounced in all of these cases, and there's a reason for that. That is because the device, it enters the brain and it activates certain autoimmune responses that are indicative of a severe case of the flu. And this response is sort of like a runaway nuclear chain reaction. In other words, it causes your body to just absolutely melt down. So, again, it's very effective. It has been shown to work in 98% of the cases, and most of the time it just looks like a very bad case of the flu. A couple things I wanted to address before I go. Again, with this information, it's of the highest order of urgency. I hope you share it with family and friends. I hope
these entities, they have no creative imagination. They do not have creativity. They're like robotic. And this stuff with transhumanism and putting technology into bodies to upgrade them, humans, is all about making us more like them.
It's about control.
Yeah, and also making us more like them by taking away what we have that they don't have, which is this creativity. I mean, all this stuff that is fed to children and adults in the food and the water is all suppressing creativity. Therefore, anything that is an expression of them, an expression of those that are possessed by them, will be by definition ugly. It's interesting too, Alex, you know, that I've been saying for years and years and years, way back into the 1990s, that these bloodlines drink the blood of children and vampire the energy of children because it rejuvenates them. And this is why so many of them live so long. It's also they get treatment we don't get in general population. But this is a big part of why some of these people, a lot of these people, live so long. I mean, look, Queen Mother, 102, Queen currently 86, Prince Philip currently 91, David Rockefeller 97, Father George Bush 88, Henry Kissinger 89, and there's a story that I saw this very day, where researchers are saying that in experiments on mice, they found that older mice are rejuvenated by being infused with blood from young mice.
Vampires, vampire mice.
Yeah, so that what they're doing, and now so many things have happened actually in the last 10 days.
By the way, I put a photo of Jimmy Savile on. He literally looks like Emperor Palpatine. He is the textbook demon Nosferatu goblin creature.
Yeah. So what they're saying here is absolutely right. They don't realize the significance of it. That if you do, these people do drink the blood of children, and it reinvigorates them. It gives them the life force of youth, which gives them longer lives. But you mentioned Savile there, and there's a big important point here, Alex. What is happening?
Är han naken? Gud, det ser ut som att de kommer från en helt annan tid, eller hur? Precis. Ja. Du, kolla. Är han naken? Så. Riktigt. Det här är inte. Filmar du det här eller?
Heading to church on Christmas Day, Prince Andrew with other royals. Any festive cheer has been replaced for him by concerns over these allegations, which he denies. Also accused and also protesting his innocence, the American lawyer Alan Dershowitz. Tonight he's preparing to take legal action against his accuser, and he told the BBC the Prince should follow suit.
My goal is to bring charges against the client and require her to speak in court. If she believes she has been hurt by me and by Prince Andrew, she should be suing us for damages. I welcome that lawsuit. I welcome any opportunity which would put her under oath and require her to state under oath these false allegations.
This man is the reason Prince Andrew's facing talk of lawsuits. It's his once close friend, the American financier Jeffrey Epstein, a registered sex offender. Andrew stayed with him and they've holidayed together. The well-connected billionaire was sentenced in 2008 to 18 months in jail after pleading guilty to an offence of soliciting a minor for prostitution. 14 years ago, Prince Andrew was photographed with Virginia Roberts, who was then 17 and who was described as Epstein's personal masseuse. Now the prince has been named in court papers. It's not an action against him. An unnamed woman alleges that when she was a minor, she was the victim of a sex trafficking scheme run by Epstein. The document reads, One such powerful individual Epstein forced the woman to have sexual relationships with was a member of the British royal family, Prince Andrew. She maintains it happened once here on Epstein's private island in the Caribbean at an orgy with numerous underage girls, and also in London and New York. Officials here at the palace insist these allegations are categorically untrue, but they know that's not the end of it. Prince Andrew took a big knock in 2011 when his links with Epstein were first scrutinised closely. 4 years on, he continues to pay a price for that friendship. Peter Hunt, BBC News, Buckingham Palace.
Är han naken? Gud, det ser ut som att de kommer från en helt annan tid, eller hur? Precis. Ja. Du, kolla. Är han naken? Så. Riktigt. Det händer inte. Filmar du det här eller?
I guess I'd be a little concerned if our police didn't enforce the laws of the state and the town.
You sure you want to ask for that? Because there are 200,000 pages of laws and you're going to break one on the way home.
I am?
Almost certainly.
Well, I'm not going to get involved.
Hold on, say that again? My bad, my bad.
She randomly just spazzed out and like jumped out of a window, like a thick window, and she said she took the glass and cut herself, and then she went on the train track trying to jump off the train track in front of the train, and she just been running around naked.
She was naked?
Yeah, naked, but naked, like no.
And what was she saying?
Nothing. All she was saying was might.
Mike?
Might. She what? She was saying might, M-I-G-H-T. Twin. She just kept saying might.
Might?
Might.
I'm down here at Back Bay Station. These people said they just saw some woman running around naked with cuts all over her, saying that she jumped out a window, saying someone was chasing her and someone was trying to kill her. This is really weird.
You want me to just meet you down there?
Mail sent.
What is on the wall that we came down after?
Lock me in.
You were in the mall?
No, they said the girl was we came from here and the woman was right there. She kept telling us to go back and I was standing there. She was like, oh, the cops coming, the cops coming. This bitch took a picture of me. Some random woman that got on the train.
Gud, det ser ut som att de kommer från en helt annan tid, eller hur?
Precis.
Ja. Du, kolla. Är han naken? Så. Riktigt. Det händer inte. Filmar du det?
Into the sea. Another factor is the ever-increasing amount of water accumulating inside damaged infrastructure. Once it makes its way into reactor buildings, it mixes with radioactive isotopes. For months, TEPCO workers have been pumping up 400 tons of water every day and storing it in tanks on site.
There's 1,060 tanks, stainless steel water tanks, that are holding the water which they keep pumping into the damaged reactors and the spent fuel storage pools.
From the air, the scale of the problems at Fukushima become clear.
The growing mass of storage tanks now dwarfs the plant itself. More than 1 million tons of highly radioactive water is now stored here.
But the tanks have been hastily built.
They're made of steel plates, bolted together, rather than welded. Last week, workers detected a major leak in one of those tanks. About 300 tons of water escaped, releasing several quadrillion becquerels of radioactive particles.
Experts have often pointed out how vulnerable they are to damage.
The tanks, though, have been put together very quickly. There's no guarantee they'll last. Their seals are made of rubber, and the joints and bolts are corroding, and they may last not more than 5 years.
So the tank farm has grown dramatically, and it's on the hill. Of course, the problem is, because it's on the hill, the water flows down, and if there's an earthquake, all of these pipes are held together with plastic piping, not much different than what you've got on a swimming pool. So the plastic pipe will snap, and that water will just run right down that roadway directly into the ocean.
And how long the contamination has been leaking into the water?
Very likely since the explosions and the meltdown at Fukushima Daiichi in March of 2011.
Wow, that is quite a long time. Now, how much and what sort of radiation is leaking into the Pacific? I know there's all different types, so if you can explain that in a little detail.
Well, clearly what we've seen now is the movement of radioactive hydrogen, tritium, which is a mobile radioactive isotope, but clearly radioactive cesium, 134, 137, strontium-90. We're seeing a full range of radioactive contaminants now moving, which indicate that the damaged cores of these reactors, the meltdowns themselves, are now contributing to the contamination of the Pacific Ocean and groundwater that's moving at about a rate of 300 to 400 metric tons per day. So
the radiation has been leaking into the water and polluting the fish continuously for the last 2 years.
Radioactive iodine-129, its half-life is 17 million years, plus strontium, plus cesium, plus tritium, and I could go on and on and on. If it gets into the sea, the algae concentrated hundreds of times, then the crustaceans concentrated hundreds of times, then the little fish, then the big fish, then us. Because we stand on the apex of the food chain. You can't taste these radioactive elements, you can't see them, and you can't smell them. They're silent.
This graphic shows the gradual contamination of the Pacific Ocean due to leaks of radioactive water from the crippled Fukushima nuclear plant in Japan. The simulation, which was run by a German Marine Research Institute, shows the entire Pacific waters being polluted by radioactive water in just 6 years.
The fuel core of Unit 4 at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant. More than 1,500 fuel rods sit in a damaged storage pool 30 meters above ground.
Yeah, the amount of radioactivity in the rods themselves is about 14,000 times that of the Hiroshima bomb.
We are dealing with diabolical energy. E equals mc squared. It's the energy that blows up nuclear bombs. Einstein said, nuclear power is a hell of a way to boil water.
They need to remove those fuel rods from the pool because if there's another earthquake, Building 4 would go down probably, and all those fuel rods would be exposed to the air and they would burn. And they would release 10 times more radiation or cesium than was released at Chernobyl, huge amounts, and pollute much of Japan and the Northern Hemisphere. So we're in a nuclear crisis at the moment.
If there's another earthquake and Building 4 collapses, which contains the cooling pool with fresh fuel, I'm going to evacuate my family from Boston.
So they've put a crane on top of that building, which is shaky anyway, and they're going to lift the fuel assemblies out one by one with the crane, and it will be done manually. Normally, those rods are removed by computer control with millimetres to spare. It's a very delicate operation.
The fuel rods must be kept submerged and must not touch each other or break. Nuclear experts warn any mishaps could cause an explosion many times worse than that one here in March 2011.
Because if several rods touch each other, you could reach criticality and the whole fuel pool could go critical. Or if the rods break as they're being lifted out, large amounts of radiation would escape from the rods and the area would have to be evacuated, meaning that the area is evacuated, the continuous operation of cooling 5 spent fuel pools and 3 melted cores would stop. Need I go on?
A study just published by the United States government reports the discovery that low-dose radiation is so safe, evacuations from future nuclear disasters may be unnecessary. If another event like Fukushima occurs, the public could be allowed to live in the fallout zones, spared from the inconvenience of relocation